Hi, my name is Anders Klinkby. I'm here together with my good colleague Mathias Holt. We've had the pleasure of doing an analysis for Dansif, Swesif and Finsif of SDG reporting guidelines. And in addition, we did interviews with 17 of the largest Nordic investors on their SDG reporting practices. So that's Sustainable Development Goals. We are here today to give a few key highlights from the report we did. The report is available on the association's website, but let's look at the main findings.
So one of the key findings of the report is that there are a number of organizations and institutions who publish SDG reporting guidelines. However, currently there are no uniformly accepted guideline for neither company nor investor reporting. So 5 of the reporting guidelines were mentioned during the interviews, and the remaining 3 were chosen by us based on an assessment of how recognized they are in the SDG reporting community.
So what's in common and what's different in the way that investors approach these different guidelines in their SDG reporting?
I'd say that again, one of the main findings was that all these frameworks they address SDG reporting differently, especially a central issue or theme as impact. So how do you actually argue impact on the SDGs? This is very different across the different SDG reporting guidelines. I'd say that another important point in regards to these SDG guidelines are the need of data and what data you can actually utilize in these guidelines.
So what did the investors say? How do they navigate this situation where you have different guidelines and you also have data issues?
Well, one of the ways that they navigate these guidelines are actually not using them. So many investors, they recognize that these guidelines, they work very well on a theoretical level, but in practice, lack of data, data quality, data coverage means that you can't utilize these otherwise, as I said, theoretically well-defined SDG reporting guidelines.
So what does that mean for investors and the way that investors report on SDGs today?
Well, it means that no investor actually utilize any of these reporting guidelines that were mentioned during the interviews, and that investors usually do more of an ad hoc, so to say, reporting. One of the most typical ways of reporting is by singling out a few SDGs, which are deemed most relevant for the investor, and then report on those.
So what are the key issues today for investors when building SDG reporting?
Well, the key issue is data. So both data quality and data coverage. If you look at ESG data as a supply chain or sustainability data as a supply chain, then it's already in the first part of the supply chain, which is the company reporting, which makes it difficult to subsequently aggregate data on a portfolio level, and then translating that into impact on the SDGs. It gets very complicated.
What was the most important wish that the investors addressed? Because everybody has a wish to report more using SDGs. On the other hand, they have these, especially data issues and guideline issues. So what did they see as the most important thing to move this forward?
So the most important thing were the company reporting, because all investors, they have a wish to be transparent, express that wish to be transparent in their SDG reporting. This includes, being able to holistically report on both positive and negative contributions to the SDGs.
So were they more specific in any point saying, okay, if you should you say what's the number one wish from investors based on the interviews we did?
I think the word maybe standardization. So standardization of the company reporting, standardization of how this company reporting is being aggregated, for example, by service providers. And then again, how does this aggregated data actually translate into SDG impact? So how do we define SDG impact based on the data that has been aggregated throughout the supply chain?
Okay, so we also saw that there were also some critical voices among investors, especially among some of the asset owners, on the use of the term impact in connection to SDG reporting. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, as you mentioned, several, especially asset owners, they argue that most or some investors lack a more refined reflection of what impact actually is and how their investment portfolios actually impact the real world, so to say.
So if we look forward try and look forward into the future and see what we can expect from SDG reporting, it seems that all the investors we talk to say that this will be an important part of the future in terms of how they will approach ESG topics. So SDG, Sustainable Development Goal reporting, will be important. But could you say a bit about how they expect this to develop and what will be the key drivers?
Yeah. As you mentioned, all investors actually say that SDGs is going to play a bigger part in their reporting in the future. Again, the issues are mostly related to data coverage and data quality. All investors actually also agree that as demand for quality ESG data increases, and so will the quality eventually increase, both from companies, so the company ESG reporting, but also service providers' methodologies and how they aggregate the data from the companies.
A number of the institutions we talked to also point to regulation as something that will drive standardization of SDG reporting. Can you say a bit about what the main points were there?
Yeah, of course. So a lot of people mentioned the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, saying that this is one step in the right direction regarding standardizing, especially environmental data. Several investors also mentioned that they don't think that the taxonomy is going to stop at the level that it is now, but that as time goes on, you will get closer and closer to, for example, human rights and labor issues. You already see it a bit now in the minimum social safeguards in the taxonomy. And when these dimensions of the taxonomy is developed, then you will also get much closer to the SDG world, so to say.
Then another important player in driving SDG reporting is PRI, who just recently published their SDG reporting guidelines. So how do interviewees see the role that PRI can play in this?
Well, obviously, PRI is a huge institution when it comes to investor reporting. So they play a very important role in standardizing investor reporting. Almost all investors also mentioned PRI as a key player in standardizing SDG reporting, as actually all of the interviews that we did, they are signatories to PRI, which means that they do their PRI reporting. So obviously PRI has a lot of influence on how investors report.
So I think we can conclude that based on the analysis and the interviews, not least with the large Nordic investors, that SDG reporting is here to stay. That it will become deeper and more developed over the coming years. And actually, what they pointed out was that this will be at the focal point of their sustainability reporting. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Also, as data quality increases and data coverage increases, you will see that SDG considerations will also be part of the investment policies and the investment decision. And when this happens, then the SDG reporting quality will also increase tremendously.
So that will be super interesting to follow. We hope you will find the report useful. So thanks for now. Bye.